Hello, I'm Carolyn Jones with Washington State Department of Social and Health Services. Welcome to another workshop on the web. You're about to view a video that will provide you with some basic information about creating a safe and nurturing home for children and youth who experience anger and acting out behaviors. This video will be useful for those accepting an emergent placement, but we want to encourage you to seek out and attend classroom training on this topic. It's offered in each region of our state. You can consult the training calendar on this website to find the times and locations for these classes. Remember, knowledge is your best tool in caring for children. And once again, thank you for all that you do for our state's most precious natural resource, our children.
Welcome. My name is Sherry Rigo. I am a program consultant and trainer with the Washington State Resource Family Training Institute. With me today is Julie Gilo.
Hi Sherry, it's nice to be here today.
Thank you, Julie.
My name is Julie Gilo and I'm a Resource Family Training Institute trainer. My husband and I are also licensed foster parents here in the state of Washington, and we currently have 6 children in our home, ranging from 9 years old to 17.
This training today is a short overview of a 6-hour training called Parenting Physically Aggressive Children and Youth that is available in all regions of Washington State. This video is intended to just give some basic information and guidance to caregivers so that you can provide a safer environment for kids who may have aggression issues. For more in-depth training, you can check our website at the bottom of the screen. And remember, always consult and collaborate with your child's social worker. The goal of this training is to assist families in understanding and managing physically aggressive behaviors in children and youth. This curriculum assumes that you are working with children and youth who have the cognitive skills to engage in problem-solving interactions with adults.
Current research is showing that trauma has long-term effects on children because the experience of abuse, neglect, and removal from your birth family are actually traumatic events. This has implications that can impact a child's behavior throughout his or her lifetime. One of these effects can be developmental delays. To illustrate this point, let's look at how fetal alcohol exposure, which is an example of prenatal trauma, can affect development. This 18-year-old person's strengths certainly don't necessarily serve him well, because someone looking at him for the first time would notice his size and physical maturity as that of an 18-year-old, and also because his expressive language skills are that of a 20-year-old. He would present with an exaggerated level of ability. So while he looks like an adult and he expresses himself like an adult, have to then also consider the emotional maturity and his social skills, which are that of a 6 or a 7-year-old. So for example, would you let a 6-year-old drive a car, go on a date, stay alone overnight? Your approach to a child must match the child's development and comprehension rather than his or her chronological age. This also would apply to many children with aggressive behaviors.
Recent studies on brain development are showing us that the brains of children who have been abused or neglected or exposed to traumatic events, that their brains might actually develop differently than that of a typically developing child. For example, the older part of their brain, the part back here, the fight or flight part of their brain, may become more developed than in a typically developing child, where the frontal part of their brain, the thinking part of their brain, may actually be less developed than that in a typically developing child. So what happens is that when a child who has suffered abuse, neglect, or trauma may find themselves in a situation that they see as potentially threatening. And remember, any new situation can be seen as a potential threat. So when they find themselves in this situation, instead of stopping to think, they do what their brain is wired to do, and that is to fight or flight. So let's do a very quick exercise to see how this might work for you. All of you at home, what I'd like you to do is sit straight in your chair and put your right leg over your left leg. Cross it at the knee and put your right leg over your left leg. And once it's there, rotate your ankle in a clockwise motion. So just get your ankle rotating around in a clockwise motion. And now take your right hand and draw 6 in the air. What happened when you tried to do that? Oftentimes what happens is your ankle starts going the other way because your brain isn't wired to do what I asked you to do. And this happens with our children. Their brain isn't wired to react in a way that we ask them or expect them to react. And then we get into arguments or conversations like this. So Julie, what did I ask you to do?
To cross my legs, to rotate my ankle, and to draw 6 in the air.
So you knew exactly what you were supposed to do, and you still didn't do it.
But I really tried.
Well, you didn't try hard enough. Does that sound familiar? We often get into these kinds of arguments with our kids. So often our kids can repeat exactly what they were supposed to do, and they really want to do, and they'll even try to do exactly what they're supposed to do, but their brain takes over. And their brain does what it's wired to do, which is often to fight or to become aggressive. So what we'll do today is we'll spend some time teaching kids to learn new responses to override their automatic response of flight or fight. But first, let's define aggression.
So the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry states that violent behavior in children and adolescents can include a wide range of behaviors. Explosive temper tantrums, fighting, threats, or attempts to hurt others, including homicidal thoughts. It can include use of weapons, cruelty towards animals, fire setting, intentional destruction of property, and vandalism. In adolescence, some relational aggression can include things like ostracizing, spreading a rumor about somebody, and this often happens amongst girls. Adolescents use both relational and physically aggressive behavior to gain and to maintain dominant, influential positions amongst their peer group. In short, to be popular. When people are agitated or aggressive, they're undergoing physiological changes in their body. So let's take a look at what those changes are. The human body responds to stressors by activating the nervous system and specific hormones. The hypothalamus signals the adrenal glands to produce more of the hormones of adrenaline and cortisol, and it releases them into the bloodstream. These hormones speed up the heart rate, the breathing rate, the blood pressure, and metabolism. Blood vessels often open wider to let more blood flow to those large muscle groups, putting those muscles on alert. Pupils are going to dilate to improve vision. The liver releases some of its stored glucose to increase the body's energy, and sweat is produced to cool the body. All of these physical changes prepare a person to react quickly and effectively. However, thinking clearly when stressed, agitated, or angry is often difficult for most of us, not just for the children, because of the physiological changes that occur within our body. This natural reaction is known as the stress response or the fight or flight response. Working properly, the body's stress response enhances a person's ability to perform well under those pressures. But the stress response can cause problems when it overreacts or it fails to turn off. Because the reaction is automatic and it's controlled by our sympathetic nervous system, there's no conscious control of the changes that our body has during a crisis. We can't consciously order our heart rate to speed up or to slow down, and we can't order our pupils to dilate or to constrict, or for our body to sweat or not to sweat. However, we can teach our children mechanisms or ways to calm themselves when they start to feel this kind of physiological response in their bodies.
Thank you, Julie. And one of the things that we're going to look at is how that physiological response that occurs actually looks to us like anger. And for a lot of people, anger is used as a substitute for some other emotions. It feels much stronger to be angry than it does to have some of those more vulnerable emotions like fear or surprise or hurt. And so a lot of times people will use anger to mask their other emotions. Anger is a distraction. Children who are hurting are thinking about their hurt and they focus on it. But if they get angry, then that focus is turned outward and they think about hurting somebody else or even getting even with somebody else. Also, sometimes when we're angry, we get a sense of self-righteousness, that we have the right to be angry at what happened to us, and that gives us a temporary boost of our self-esteem. So sometimes feeling angry is actually satisfying, not only to adults but to children as well. Instead of feeling afraid or vulnerable, anger can help us to feel powerful and in control of what can be a very frightening situation. Because of this, some children will actually cling to their anger, and we need to teach these children other ways to express their anger. We need to teach them appropriate ways to express their anger. So I want you to think just for a second about some of the ways in your home that are appropriate ways for displaying anger. Think about what is allowed in your home as an angry response. We have some other suggestions for you as well. One of the first things that you can do is relaxation techniques. Deep breathing. Deep breathing from the diaphragm is one of the great things that you can do. And one way to teach children this, because a lot of times children have very shallow breathing. They breathe very quickly and very shallowly, which would be like, and we need to actually teach them a way to breathe in a much deeper way. So one of the things that you can do, and I think Julie has done this with her children, one of the things that you can do is actually have your child lay on the floor and ask them to breathe so that their tummy goes up and down. And that's a deep breath. That's a calming breath, and that's much different than those shallow breaths that we often see. So deep breathing, maybe slow repetition of a calming word can be done while they're breathing, or sometimes counting will help. Visualization is another good technique to help them calm down, or calming exercises such as yoga might also help too. Also in our list of relaxation techniques, we can have, appropriate expressions of anger, we can have problem solving. And what you do in problem solving is you help the child identify the circumstance that's making them angry, and then talk with them about some ideas of how they could either avoid that circumstance or how they could work with that circumstance in the future to make it less threatening and less painful to them. We're going to spend a lot of time a little later on in this video talking about problem solving. Another good suggestion is typing a letter to nowhere. You can have the child sit at the computer and type a letter and type their feelings, and anything they want to say is allowed in this letter. They can say anything that they want to say. The only rule is they don't print it, they don't save it, they don't send it to anybody. When they're all done venting, they erase it, they delete it, and it's gone. This is very similar to journaling, which is another technique that you might use with kids. You might help them write a journal or show them ways to write a journal. Very young kids might draw instead of journaling. And then, of course, physical activity. When we get into that angry feeling, or when our body takes over that automatic response system like Julie was talking about, what happens is we get a lot of all of those all of that adrenaline and that cortisol that Julie was talking about starts coursing through our body. So for some kids, they actually need to do something physical. They can't stop and talk right at that second because they have all of this energy in their bodies. So maybe they can run around the house, outside around the house, or maybe they can go shoot hoops. But there might be something that they do physically to get rid of some of that physical aggression. If going outside isn't safe or not healthy for whatever reason, you might have old phone books in your house and they can tear up their phone books. So that you need to make sure that in your home you have appropriate ways to display angry behavior, because these kids may have the anger and they need to know what to do with it.
Right. So sometimes we start seeing children as they begin to escalate, and we might actually be able to respond before that angry outburst or aggressive act actually occurs. So let's take a look at 4 levels of escalation and discuss the ways that we can respond to each one of them. So there is a level called an antecedent level, or the trigger. This is the signal that to the body that a situation is potentially threatening. For most of us, this is going to cause some anxiety. However, depending on our past experiences, some of us might actually immediately become defensive or aggressive or even dangerous. Escalation is not always a clean progression. We don't always start at anxiety and move to defensiveness and then to aggressive and then to dangerous. Some people, including children and adolescents, can escalate very quickly, and they can go from 0 to 60, or in other words, go immediately to aggressive or to dangerous behaviors. So to understand how escalation may progress, let's think a little bit about how we can intervene in different places. And let's start with level 1, with anxiety, and with the behaviors that are associated with that. So anxiety behavior occurs when a child is feeling like there might be a threat. However, the child is not actually seeing the threat as being, an issue for their survival. So for an example, the child is going to the dentist to either have their teeth cleaned or, to get some fillings. And what we're going to look at then is what's the child's physiological or physical response to that anxious type of feeling that they have. So what does anxiety feel like for that child? When we think about it, it might include things like their heart pumping or racing, or like it's beating too fast or coming up into their throat. They might feel some tingling in their fingers or in their toes. They might just have this worried kind of feeling. They might actually get a little bit short of breath. There might be this kind of helpless feeling, like they just don't know how to solve that particular problem. And they might actually recognize being fearful or scared. So then if we take those anxious feelings and move to the next step, what might this actually look like in a behavior manner? So what does anxiety look like? Well, it can include sweating, fidgeting, twitching, pacing, unable to sit still, to focus, to concentrate. And this can apply to adults as well as to children. I mean, I went to the dentist yesterday, and I have to admit, I felt all of these things while sitting in that dentist chair. And then, what might you hear in terms of a child's anxiety? So in other words, what does anxiety sound like? And that could include just chattering about nonsense issues, just superficial conversational speech. It could include something called perseveration, which is kind of non-stop talking or focusing about the same subject, not being able to get off of it, getting stuck. And sometimes it could be presented as just being very quiet and not talking at all. So then comes to me a very important piece, which is how might you respond to the child that's exhibiting these anxious behaviors? First of all, be supportive and non-judgmental. Being positive and reassuring. Use reflective listening to respond to what the child is saying and telling you and what they're feeling. Asking open-ended questions to facilitate conversation and sharing. Do some problem solving. For example, if a child is anxious about going to the dentist, problem solve with them about what kinds of things could they do to help with that anxiety. And some of those solutions or options might be, could the child listen to music on his or her headphones while they're at the dentist? Or could the child go with you to an appointment for another child or for yourself beforehand so that they can actually see what's going to be happening?
Next on our continuum of escalating behaviors is defensive behavior, and some kids will go directly from anxious behavior to defensive behavior. And at this defensive level, the person is focusing more intently on surviving the crisis, and so their hearing, seeing, and thinking all become very narrow. So what does this feel like for the child when they get to the defensive stage? They may be stuck on a problem or an idea. They can't move on. And they may have still present from the anxiety phase the heart pumping, the shortness of breath, tingling, worried, a sense that the problem is unsolvable. What does it look like? What does defensive behavior look like to you? The child is protective of their space, but they're quick to crowd others. The child doesn't seem to be listening, can't sit still. And still present from the anxiety phase may be the sweating, the pacing, the twitching, and the fidgeting. So what might you hear? What does defensive behavior sound like? Rapid speech, talking very quickly, very loud voice, and we might have still present the perseveration, staying on the same subject over and over. So how do you respond to a child when they're at this level, when they're at the defensive level? Some things that you can do is the first thing to do is concentrate on turning down the heat. Defensiveness can escalate into aggression unless you intervene. So try to get through the sensory, the visual, and auditory shutdown. Maintain a comfortable distance and use body language and voice that show your good nature and to get the child's attention. Describe the current behavior and how it differs from usual or baseline behavior. And ask open-ended questions to gather information and also to help move the child from the emotional part of their brain to the thinking part of their brain.
So when the child reaches the aggressive behavior level, all that built-up energy is now needing a place to be released. And so this can be displayed by incessant kind of questioning, their refusal to cooperate, an escalation in verbal attacks, or even the beginnings of some physical things. So the person's sensors are now getting narrowed, and they're focusing on that built-up energy that's in their bodies. This is actually when it starts to often get quite scary for the people that are around and involved in this situation. So what might aggressive behaviors actually look like? Or what might they feel like, excuse me. So to the child, they might feel like they have just this surge of high energy. And for some kids, that's actually a very pleasant feeling, or almost like an adrenaline rush. Still present for these children might be leftovers from the anxiety and other phases, like the heart pumping. They still might be short of breath, the tingling, the feeling worried and being stuck on an idea and the problem, and that they can't move on. It might look like to you, these aggressive behaviors, this is what you may be watching or seeing, is that their faces start to get red, their muscles tighten, their fists clench, they may arch their back, come up on their toes, and they may start to throw items. And still present could be the things like the sweating, the pacing, the twitching, and the fidgeting. So what might aggressive behavior sound like? It might be incessant questioning, refusals to comply, having verbal attacks such as name-calling, cussing and swearing, and actual threats. And still present could be that chattering, the perseveration and being stuck on the same subject, rapid speech, and loud voice tones. Response techniques for aggressive behaviors should focus on moving the child or the person from emotion to thought. In other words, we want to bring them from the back of their brain to the front of their brain. So we want to define appropriate behaviors, we want to set limits, we want to give choices. Remember to keep your voice level normal. Do not get angry along with the youth, and to maintain a non-threatening stance. This isn't the time necessarily to try to overshout or overpower in a voice tone. You want to acknowledge the youth's behavior. You want to clearly define the appropriate behavior as well, though, and set limits and expectations. Asking them, what do you want? What can I do to help you? Is there something that you need from me? If the want is reasonable, ask them, is what you're doing now going to get you what you want? And giving the youth a choice. And then sometimes it's actually withdrawing and waiting quietly. Not necessarily leaving the room, but just moving back, maybe out of their body space, and being quiet and waiting.
On the escalation scale, in danger behavior, the person's focus is now on that fight or flight. They're in their survival mode. There's a high probability at this point that they will attempt the threats that they've been making, that they'll attempt to complete those threats, and the verbal attacks can become very focused and much more intense. So what does this feel like to the child when they're in danger behavior? A lot of muscle tension. They feel as if they're ready to explode. They may also feel out of control. And they can still have the heart pumping, the shortness of breath, the tingling, the worries, and stuck on an idea. And what does it look like to you, the caregiver? The child may have their feet spaced apart. Their neck muscles may become very prominent. Their eyes might be set and glaring. Their fists are clenched. And instead of just throwing items, they're now throwing items at you. Still present can be the sweating, pacing, twitching, fidgeting, not listening, can't sit still, the red face, and all of those tight muscles. So what does danger behavior sound like? What might you be hearing when a child's at this level? Verbal attacks towards others, rage, and persistence. And still present, the chattering, perseveration, rapid speech, loud, incessant questioning, refusals to comply. So what do you do when a child's at danger behavior? Your response must focus on safety. You must take the threat seriously. You must increase the distance between you and the youth and have all unnecessary people leave the room. Look for escape routes. Look for any obstacles that you can put between yourself and the child. Maintain a non-threatening body language yourself. Stay calm, as sudden actions can precipitate a violent reaction or panic in a dangerous person. Follow your crisis plan and call for help, and call 911 if necessary.
Okay. So when you respond to angry or aggressive behaviors, the first and most important thing that you want to do is to have a plan. Have a plan to act, not to react. If you have an action plan, the situation is going to resolve much more easily and quickly than if you react in an unplanned or highly charged emotional state, because that is not going to be the best time for you to be thinking clearly either. So I want you to look at this quote from a renowned psychologist and author of Between Parent and Child. I've come to the frightening conclusion that I am the decisive element in the classroom. My personal approach creates the climate. My daily mood makes the weather. As a teacher, I possess a tremendous power to make a child's life miserable or joyous. I can humiliate or humor. I can hurt or heal. In all situations, it is my response that decides whether a crisis will be escalated or de-escalated, and a child humanized or dehumanized. In other words, your response to a situation is more than just the words that you say. Extensive research shows us that 7% of meaning is in the words that are spoken. 38% of the meaning is paralinguistic. In other words, this is your tone or the way that the words are said. And 55% of the meaning is in facial expression. Again, our response, our behaviors, our words certainly set an immediate tone. And let's take a look now actually at a couple of video clips, and let's see how the parent's tone can help set the mood for either the encouraging or the minimizing of a conflict. So let's take a look at this particular video clip.
Cynthia!
Yes?
Come here, please.
What? Did anything happen at school today? Not really. Are you sure you didn't get into some trouble with your teacher or one of your classmates?
I was supposed to give you that note.
Why didn't you?
I forgot.
Why did you hit that poor little girl?
She started it.
When are you going to stop blaming others for things you do?
I hate you.
How dare you talk to me like that? You know I don't allow that kind of talk in this house.
It's the truth. I hate you and I hate living here.
Come back here. Cynthia, are you listening to me? Cynthia, what is the matter with you?
Wow. So I think we can all see how this parent's reaction to the situation actually intensified the child's behavior.
Yeah, she certainly led to an escalation of that behavior.
Yep.
And it'd be nice to see her do that in a way where it didn't lead to that escalation, where
Oh.
she could actually calm the situation.
All right. So let's then switch to another video clip and actually watch this mother's response in a more appropriate manner to a child's behavior.
Cynthia! Yes? Come here, please. What? I saw this note in your backpack, and since it had my name on it, I opened it.
I forgot.
Okay. Sit with me. I'd like to hear what happened. Come on, sit down. Well?
Kelly started it.
Okay. Tell me more.
She made me do it. I was in the bathroom washing my hands, not bothering nobody, and Kelly came up and splashed water on me. Then she laughed, because water got all over me.
Sounds like you were angry.
Yeah, she's a real bitch. She's always doing stuff when the teacher's not around, and then she tries to get other kids in trouble. I hate her. So she had it coming. She splashed that water on me, and I gave her what she deserved. I smacked her.
You were that angry?
Oh yeah, she really pissed me off.
So you just got really angry and just hit her?
Well, yeah.
Okay, then what happened?
She just started bawling. Then she ran and got old bag Carlson, who just loves to get me in trouble.
What did Mrs. Carlson do?
She took Kelly's side, of course.
She took Kelly's side. What does that mean?
Because I got sent to the principal's office, and Kelly didn't.
Oh, I bet that was scary.
Wasn't the first time.
Yeah, that has been a problem. What do you think you could do next time someone bothers you like that to keep from going to the principal's office?
I could beat her up on the way home from school. That way old bag Carlson wouldn't be around to protect her.
Yeah, and then what would happen?
She's such a baby. She'd tell on me anyway, and I'd still get in trouble.
Yeah, you would. What else could you do?
I could tell on her before she tells on me.
Any other ideas? What do the other kids do when Kelly bothers them?
Sally just ignores her and walks away.
There's another idea. Do you think you could do that?
I don't know. Never done that.
Would you like to learn that skill? It's called planned ignoring. We could practice. Say I'm Kelly and I'm in the bathroom and I splash water on you. How could you ignore that?
Wow, that was a much better response. As we've discussed, an important element of working with aggressive children is actually prevention. And one of the ways to prevent aggressive outbursts is to look for triggers. What are those things that make this child act aggressively? And then to minimize those triggers. Triggers can be many, many different things. Triggers might be sensory. These can be tags on clothing. It can be noise in the room. It can be the type of light that's being used. All of those can be sensory triggers. Triggers might also be situational. It might be reading, toileting, writing, maybe family mealtime might be a trigger for a child. Transitions are often a trigger for kids, having to transition from playing to going to bed or from playing to doing their homework. Any of those transition times can be big triggers. There might also be interpersonal triggers. It might be a particular person that this person just gets aggravated with. And the time of day. Sometimes morning is a trigger, sometimes night is a trigger, sometimes mealtime is a trigger, as we said earlier. So let's look at some situations and see if we can identify what the possible triggers might be in these situations. So in the first example, we have a 5-year-old boy who comes home from preschool, and he comes home from daycare, and he's very agitated. He's lashing out, he's hitting his mother, he's calling her names, he throws his shoes into his room, and his physical aggression continues. He's disruptive, he's yelling at everybody in the home, name-calling, throwing things for no apparent reason, other than he just doesn't want to do what he's asked to do. 2 hours later, this child has a very painful bowel movement. So what could be some triggers for his aggressive behavior that we've just seen? If you can determine the trigger, then you can minimize that trigger. For example, if the trigger was that he was constipated, then you might change his diet. You might change his meal so that that wouldn't be a problem in the future. Or perhaps the trigger was sensory. Maybe he was wearing socks where the seam of the sock was stuck under his toe, and so all day long that was rubbing against his foot, and that just drove him crazy. So what you would do in that case is you would get different socks that didn't have that seam, or help him find a way to wear his socks more comfortably. Knowing the trigger can help you to minimize the trigger, and minimizing triggers is going to minimize the number of aggressive outbursts.
So let's look at another situation. Here we have a 10-year-old boy who is asked to put on his pajamas as part of his regular routine. He grabs his brand new pair of pajamas that are bright blue with red fire trucks on them. He turns to his foster mom. He begins to yell, to scream, to throw the pajamas onto the floor, stomping on them, throwing objects in his room, just yelling and crying and hitting. So here, what could some of the triggers be for these aggressive behaviors? Again, we might want to look at sensory. It could be that the touch of these pajamas actually itch or hurt. Maybe they haven't been washed yet. It could be that there's some kind of a triggering smell, either the smell of the new pajamas or the detergent that was used. Maybe there was some traumatic event in that child's past that involved fire or fire trucks. Or again, it could be the color of these particular pajamas, the bright blue with the red, fire trucks. And maybe things would have been better with either a softer texture or pajamas that were pastel or just plain colored.
Let's look at another example. A 14-year-old girl is looking forward to going on her field trip at school. It's been scheduled for a few weeks, and she's very excited about it. But an unexpected snowstorm blows into town, and the school is canceled for the day. When she sees the cancellation on TV, she goes crazy. She throws her cereal bowl, she picks up her backpack, she throws it out in the snow, and she kicks the dog. What could be some triggers for her aggressive behavior? Well, certainly it might be a change in the weather, might be a trigger for her. Or it may be the disappointment now that she has to change her thinking. She's not going on a field trip now, she's going to school. And so that transition of thought might be a trigger for her. And this may be one of those cases where you can't change the trigger. You can't change the weather. You can't change the school board's decision to cancel school, but just knowing what her triggers are can help you respond to her behavior more objectively and more appropriately.
So a fourth and final scenario here. A father reminds his 15-year-old foster son that it's time to take a shower as part of his nighttime routine. The young man refuses to take a shower and then proceeds to throw the towel, the soap on the rope, the shampoo on the bathroom floor. He's yelling, screaming, cussing at his father, saying, "It's not fair. I'm grown up. I don't need to shower anymore." So here again, let's look at some possible triggers for these aggressive behaviors. We could again start with sensory issues. Maybe the feeling of the shower, the water pricking him on his skin might actually hurt. And in that case, you could give him a choice. Would you like to take a shower or would you like to take a bath? The darkness behind the shower curtain may be fearful or might be bringing up old histories. It might be the smell of the shampoo or the soap that's irritating towards him. It could be the fear that somebody might come in while he's showering, and you can offer them some privacy then and reassurance about the door stays shut or even having a lock on the door. The other thing that may be important for some of us to remember sometimes is that bad body odor, poor hygiene, and other kinds of things might actually be a survival mechanism. And it might have been the way that that child attempted to protect themselves from being abused. There might be other issues around needing assistance with organization for the shower. What kinds of things do I need to get ready? And maybe he needs more time transitioning from previous activity to the nighttime activities of taking a shower and getting ready for bed.
Great. Looking for triggers can be a way that helps us to plan for a safer environment for kids. As I said earlier, if we can minimize the number of triggers, then we can minimize the number of aggressive outbursts. We're going to spend some time now looking at other ways to minimize aggressive episodes, as well as ways to respond when an aggressive episode does occur.
All right, so as we learned earlier, many angry and aggressive children are delayed in some areas of their development. So very often, those areas might be emotional and social and language delays. So if we think of a dog or a puppy, dogs have very little emotional development, very little language development or skills. So if we were to step on that tail of that dog, they basically have three ways or three options to respond to us. They can bark, they can bite, or they can run away. These are the same three options that many of our children and our youth who have developmental delays or emotional or language delays, that might be their options. So when they feel threatened or hurt or fearful, they may also resort to those same three options, which is they bark by hollering, by screaming, by yelling, by cussing and swearing, by name calling. Or they might bite, or hit, or punch, or kick.
Or pinch.
Or pinch, absolutely. Or they might run away. So they sometimes have the very same three options that our pets have. So we need to help kids learn more appropriate responses by improving the skills that are necessary or that they're lacking. So if our philosophy assumes that many youth have not yet learned the necessary skills to live happy and healthy and well-adjusted lives, then our approach needs to focus on our actively teaching them these skills. A very good way to teach these new skills is to actually state the expectation, have them repeat and practice over and over, to rehearse it, and then to give them positive reinforcement for their behaviors. So it's actually absolutely key that a youth understands what's expected of him or her. Clear communications of expectations is critical to the success of parenting. For many youth in care, just knowing the expectations, though, is not enough. They lack the basic foundational skills that are necessary to comply with these expectations. This lack of skills can then mean that they're not able to comply with the expectations even when they want to. So it's not always an issue of that they won't do something, it's often that they can't do it. So in addition to communicating our expectations, we need to be aware of what their skill levels are or their lack of skills, and then go about actively teaching them the appropriate skills by consistently rewarding and reinforcing acceptable behaviors. To do this successfully, parents need to know about what rewards or what positive reinforcers are important or valid for the children in their care, because not everybody is motivated or responds to the same type of thing. Different children are going to respond to different reinforcers. So let's take a look at some specific categories of reinforcers. We certainly have social reinforcers. We have praise, we have smiling, we have head nodding, attention, giving them touch, hugging, listening, just spending time together. Those are all social reinforcers. We then have what we would call consumable reinforcers, things like snacks or candy, juice, a stick of gum, dining out, or having a special meal prepared for them. We have activity reinforcers, and those might include things like watching TV, reading a book, hobbies, movies, sports activities, having friends over, or getting additional telephone time. We have manipulative reinforcers, and I'm not talking about us manipulating them, but rather things that our children can manipulate. So things like toys or blocks, puzzles, jigsaw puzzles, Legos, painting kits, arts and crafts. And then finally, we have an exchangeable reinforcer. And those can be those sticker charts, stars, points, money and allowance, other kinds of objects that can actually be exchanged then by the child for other types of reinforcers.
Great. In addition to rewarding appropriate and acceptable behavior, we must also have a way of responding to inappropriate behaviors. Consequences can be a great way to respond to inappropriate behaviors, but the consequence has to be logical, and it has to follow a few other steps. So when applying a logical consequence, there are 4 things to remember. The first one is the consequence is meant to teach the child, not to punish the child. Consequences are meant to teach the child responsibility for making them responsible for the offending behavior, not to punish them. Secondly, the consequence must be related to the offending behavior. Julie, I remember when my son was 5 years old, and he would come home from school, and he would bring his lunchbox home from school. And it would be ooey, gooey, sticky, icky, dripping as he's carrying his lunchbox into the house. And so every day my husband would say, please dump this at school. Dump your garbage at school. Please don't do this. Why do you bring home a dirty lunchbox? I'm sick and tired of a dirty lunchbox. And finally, one day, he said to my son, who was 5 years old, he says, that does it. I am sick and tired of these dirty lunchboxes. Because you bring home a dirty lunchbox, no TV for you in the mornings. Well, my son, at 5 years old, he looked at his dad, and he took his hands, and he weighed his hands like this, and he said, Daddy, that doesn't make any sense. And he says, because I don't bring home a dirty lunchbox because I watch TV in the morning. So my husband said, okay, what do you think would be a better idea? And my son said, well, if I bring home a dirty lunchbox, I should have to clean it when I get home, which is a perfect example of a logical consequence. Taking TV away from a child is not a bad thing to do, but it was completely unrelated to his dirty lunchbox. And at 5 years old, he could come up with a related consequence. So, as I was saying, consequences are to teach, not to punish. They must be related to the offending behavior, and they must be reasonable. And what we mean by this is that if a child is at school and they draw on their desk, it's completely reasonable for the teacher to ask that child to stay and clean off their desk. But to ask that child to stay and clean all 32 desks in that room would be unreasonable, because the child didn't write on all 32 desks. The child wrote on one desk. And the fourth thing that we need to remember with logical consequences is it must be respectful. You cannot use consequences that are shaming, belittling, humiliating, or embarrassing to kids. We had a situation with this a few years ago. Foster parents were sometimes thinking that their children dawdle. You probably have a few kids in your home that dawdle. And so the foster parents would think, well, a logical consequence is if you're not ready for school, if you're not dressed to go to school, then you'll go to school in your pajamas. Right. Although that might sound logical, it's a very inappropriate logical consequence to use, because it's embarrassing, it's humiliating, it's shaming, and it's belittling to the child. So, we have another example for you of how you might use a logical consequence. In this example, there's a 13-year-old child in your home who has learned to do his own laundry, but in doing his own laundry, he didn't follow the rules correctly and he broke your dryer. So you can tie a consequence back to that behavior. And what you can say to that child is, it took me a lot of time to call the repairman, to wait for the repairman, to be here while the repairman was here. And so you need to repay me back for some of that time. And in essence, what you're saying is, if you took my time, then you must give me some time. So the way that you might say a logical consequence is, because I had to stay home and I had to call the repairman and I had to wait for the repairman and I had to be here while the repairman was here, then I need you to do some of my chores that I was unable to do while I was doing that. So what I would like you to do is I'd like you to get the laundry out and fold it for me. I want you to pay attention clearly to the fact that we're not just giving this child additional chores, because that would be punitive, that would be punishing. What we're doing is telling the child that because of their actions, our time was used in a way we didn't expect, and now they need to make that up to us by doing something for us.
That's a great way of helping them learn some natural cause and effect.
Yes,
too, right?
Exactly. Thank you.
So the next thing that we're going to look at is actually another technique that's called problem solving. And problem solving can be very effective for children with aggressive behaviors. Dr. Ross Green uses a system that he calls collaborative problem solving. The key philosophy of his technique is that children do well if they can. This is fundamentally different than children do well if they want to. According to Dr. Green, many explosive, non-compliant behaviors are not manipulative, they're not attention-seeking, and they're not based on the fact that the child is not motivated. He believes that children more often don't do well because they lack certain skills. So many children are not able to comply with our expectations because of developmental delays. They lack the skills that they need to be successful. So thinking of it in this way takes away a lot of the blame and the shame, as well as our temptation to inflict punishment or something on the kids rather than to be working with them and teaching them. Problem solving is a technique that helps the child and the adult reach a mutually satisfactory resolution to whatever the problem or the issue is that was precipitating those difficult interactions to begin with. So Dr. Green's collaborative problem-solving technique uses a three-step model or method, but we're going to actually focus on a five-step method or model. And what we're going to, those 5 steps include, number 1, defining the problem, number 2, brainstorming alternatives, 3, choosing a solution, 4, obtaining a commitment, and 5, evaluating the results. So let's actually go back to that example of the dryer being broken, okay? So, Sherry, you know, you broke the dryer while you were trying to do your laundry.
I didn't mean to.
I know. But you did break the dryer, and I had to spend an awful lot of time making the phone calls to schedule the repair appointment, waiting for the repair person to come, and because he couldn't get there for 2 or 3 days, I had a lot of time involved in actually going to the laundromat to keeping us ahead of our laundry.
So what do you want me to do?
Well, I'd really like you to help me with this. So what kinds of things do you think that you could do to assist me with the time that I've lost or the time that I had to put into it? Do you have any ideas?
Well, I can't give you the time back.
No? What other kinds of things could you help me with, though, to maybe make up some of that time?
Oh, because like you got behind?
I did. I got way behind on my chores.
Oh. Well, I guess I could do, like, maybe I could do one of your chores for you, like wash the dishes or, like, sweep the floor or something.
Those sound like excellent options. Absolutely. Any other ideas, things that you might be able to do to help?
Maybe I could, like, I know how you read to the little kids at night, so maybe I could read to them instead, and then that would give you time to wash the dishes and sweep the floor.
All right. Okay. Those are really good options, Sherry. So let's think about which one might work best for us. Okay? So, I really like reading to the children and stuff at night. I really like being able to do that. And I like it when you're involved with that as well and sitting with us. But, I could really use some help with the dishes tonight. Would that be a reasonable thing to ask?
Yeah, I could do that.
Would you?
I can do the dishes tonight. Do it just tonight, or should I do them tomorrow too?
If we could just do them tonight, that would really help me get set back into my schedule.
Okay, and I'm really sorry about the dryer.
I know, and I really accept your apology as well. Thank you.
Okay.
So, let's take a look actually now at another example on a video clip in regards to some problem-solving techniques.
Today I learned my 8 times table.
Okay, so what's 8 times 5?
40.
Okay. What's 8 times 10?
10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80.
Okay, smarty. What's 8 times 20?
I don't know.
It's simple. 8 times 10 is 80. 8 times 20 is 160. Get it?
You're confusing me.
That's because you're such a big dummy.
Hey guys, no name calling.
Haha, you got caught.
Shove it. No wonder why you flunked second grade.
Whoa, this is getting way out of hand.
Well, it's the truth. You know he did.
Jesse, I want you to go sit on that couch and think about this for a few minutes. I'm going to come in and talk to you. Go on.
Why'd you have to live here with us?
Come on, let's go wash your face. Whoa, what happened in there?
I don't know.
It sounded pretty mean to me.
You always take his side.
Mm. Is that unfair?
Yeah. He's younger and you let him get away with everything.
You sound pretty mad.
Wouldn't you be?
I can see that makes you angry, but the rules are no name calling or meanness to each other. What can you do when you think things are unfair?
I don't know.
Well, let's think about it.
You're gonna make me say I'm sorry, aren't you?
Well, that's one option. Can we think of something else?
I don't know.
How about you pay Tony's way to Disneyland?
Yeah.
Didn't like that one, huh?
No.
Give me another idea.
Well, tonight's Tony's night to take out the garbage. I suppose I could do his chore.
Wow, another good idea. Are you ready to go talk to Tony about this?
That's the only way I'll get to eat spaghetti. I suppose I'll have to.
Good. Come on. Let's go have some spaghetti.
So that foster mom provided some very nice examples of assisting her foster daughter with some problem solving, some brainstorming alternatives, and certainly went a long ways, I think, in de-escalating, some potentially aggressive behaviors. So what kinds of things make up a good solution to a problem? Any solution that two parties agree to that is realistic, doable, and mutually satisfactory makes for a good solution.
And Julie, I think it's really important for us as caregivers to remember that, because sometimes if we ask kids to come up with their own solutions, it works for them even though we may see a problem in it. I remember when my children were young and they would always fight over who got to ride up front. And so they were very young. They were only 5 and 7, and I told them, we have this problem every single day. So what I'd like you guys to do is you guys talk about it, you guys figure it out, and you tell me what the solution is. So they went into their bedroom and they talked and they discussed and they talked about it, and they came back out to me and they said, okay, Mom, we've got an answer. And I said, okay, what is it? And so the oldest son, the 7-year-old, said to me, well, here's the solution. We'll look at a clock, and if it's before 12 noon, then the 5-year-old gets to ride up front. But if it's after noon, then the 7-year-old gets to ride up front. Well, I was thinking to myself, this is not fair. The 5-year-old only gets up front for like 4 hours a day, whereas the 7-year-old was going to have, 8 or 9 hours. But it was a solution they chose, so I didn't think it was up to me at that point to come back and say, nope, I don't like that. That's a bad idea. We're not going to do that. So I said, okay, let's try that. You guys came up with a good solution. Let's try that. And you know what, Julie? It worked for 6 years.
Wow.
Finally, when the youngest was 11, they were going out to the car, looked at their watches to see who got to ride up front, and the 11-year-old, the youngest, who was then 11, said, wait a minute. But for 6 years, they had solved their own problem. So just as it's important to have a plan for responding to angry and aggressive behaviors, it's also essential to have a crisis plan. What do you do when things are going really wrong? It's also important that your child's social worker be a part of this crisis plan and be in agreement with the crisis plan. If an aggressive or explosive child has received services in the community, a crisis or emergency plan may already be a part of the treatment file. But the best crisis planning takes place early in a case. It considers the past and present experiences of the child. It includes input from the youth, the social worker, and any others who witness or manage the child when he is agitated or escalating. A team meeting including the family, both the birth family and the foster family, therapists, teachers, and any formal and informal resources is an ideal place to develop a comprehensive crisis plan. And Julie, you were telling me that you just created a crisis plan for one of your sons.
We did. So we had a team meeting at school. There had been a definite escalation in aggressive behavior both at home and at school. after the death of a family member of this young man's. And so it was very important for us to have a team meeting to gather information, for me to share with the school some of the history, some of the background, some of the things that were happening at home as well. It was also very important for me to hear what was happening at school. So that sharing of information was definitely important. Examining his history, you know, trying to determine, you know, what parts of his past, his history, other kinds of information may be playing a part in all of this. It was also important for us to start looking as a team at what exactly is the youth, or why are they engaging in this kind of behavior, that explosive behavior. So what were some of the triggers, you know, the antecedents that were happening? In this particular case, often it was situational, it was transitional, so it was often happening not in the classroom, but like in the hallways, between the classes, when there's lots of noise, lots of chaos, certainly less supervision.
Yes.
A lot of it had to do with interpersonal, and there was a group of young people who had figured out what the buttons were, you know, to push. And so it was important for us all to look at those antecedents and those triggers. It was also important for us to look at what's the youth expecting to get out of this, you know, type of behavior. What are the consequences? And it can, you know, sometimes remembering that a negative consequence, or what we as the caregiver perceive as a negative consequence, isn't always negative for the youth. And so, you know, to me, if I were drawing attention to myself in the hallway, that would be embarrassing for me. It would be something I would back away from. But for this young man, it was actually putting the spotlight on him, putting the focus on him. Same thing often applies like with gangs. You know, I mean, to me, a negative reaction or a negative consequence would be involvement with a gang and everything that goes along with that. But for many of our youth, the gangs are fulfilling a lot of needs for our children. It's also important to remember what the function is for that particular behavior. And something that's done a lot in schools and in other settings or environments with our children is something called a functional behavioral assessment, or an FBA. And, you know, we're all, I believe anyway, that we're needs-driven beings, you know, that we have behaviors because we're cold, or because we're hungry, or because we're tired, or for many people it's we need power and control, or we want attention. And so if we can start to assess what the need is underneath the behavior, what's driving those behaviors, then we can put into place some positive behavior supports, or some positive choices. So for Ricky, you know, who was needing to have some attention from peers and from adults, but a lot of it also had to do with transitional issues or sensory issues. We put into place, you know, ideas and strategies about that he could select 1 or 2 friends and have lunch in the teacher's room rather than in this big cafeteria where there's 2,500 other students. And so that was a solution. He was also given permission to be able to call me at any point in time during the day, that he could stop, you know, not only his behavior and his emotions, but he could stop, you know, what was going on in the classroom and say, I need to call my mom and process this. I need to call her and talk to her. So those were, you know, plans, their strengths, and then to take into consideration the natural strengths and supports that, you know, our young people may have. My son is actually very motivated by adult approval. And, you know, he wants to please people. Well, that's a strength then to be pitched, you know, to. And when we can assess the risks, making sure that we're not setting him up, you know, for future involvement, for future failure. Also exploring and identifying the resources. Ricky has a natural inclination to gravitate to certain people that help him escalate and to be big. And so we needed to identify other people in his life, like at school, that he may not actually have naturally navigated towards, but those people then were in the plan, they were part of it, they knew what to watch for, and they would then make overtures to, you know, to him saying, wow, you know, I could use some help, would you come and help me?
Wow, so that's a great crisis plan that actually involves many people.
Many
people on the team are involved in that crisis plan.
Yes, and it made, a huge, huge difference. Went from, 3 emergency expulsions in 2 weeks to now having allowed him to re-earn so many of his, rewards and other positive reinforcers.
Great, thanks for sharing that with us,
welcome.
Julie. That's great. So keep in mind that an effective crisis plan is user-friendly, has clear directions, it's individualized. A plan for one child isn't necessarily going to work for the next child, and it's also preventative. As Julie said, her son was able to eat not in the cafeteria, but in another quieter room to prevent the problem. It plans for real-life situations, is developed collaboratively between many, many people on the team, and changes as the youth and the child changes. So it may be helpful for the team to plan for potential difficulties in various environments, at home, in school, in the community, and to identify strategies that will help that child de-escalate when they find themselves in those situations. All caregivers should be prepared to handle the situation in the agreed upon way, because we need to make sure that it's consistent. And remember, you are not alone. You are part of a team with the child's social worker, therapist, doctor, psychiatrist, and many more people. In addition to knowing how to contact the team members in a time of crisis, make sure that you have these other important numbers handy. DSHS emergency and after-hour contacts, your local or community crisis line phone numbers, know how to call 911, and any other community resources that may be helpful to you.
You've undoubtedly learned that your life changed forever when you became foster or adoptive parents. And during pre-service trainings, you began to anticipate what some of those changes might be from the moment that a child was placed with you. But, some of those things can include things like, having less privacy, that there's now another person to include in your plans, in communication, in scheduling, and that sometimes family rules may have to be changed as additional family members enter your lives. So you may have noticed that changes in your day-to-day routine and home life have changed, and also how you interact with your extended family, with community providers, with friends, just with the outside world as a whole. Parents need to have a plan for self-care. If you don't take care of yourself, you're not going to be able to have much left, over to care for your children. Think of a time when you're traveling on a plane. That flight attendant describes the plane, the emergency situations, and they talk to you about that in, certain cases of atmosphere changes, that masks are going to drop from the ceiling. And that flight attendant counsels you and tells you to place the mask on yourself first before you go to assist anyone else in your vicinity or even your own children. And that's the same thing with our need for self-care. We need to take care of ourselves first before we can take care of the children that need us. So here are some questions that I think it's very important for us to ask ourselves to determine if we are taking care of ourselves. Have you kept in touch with supportive friends, or have you lost touch in the frantic day-to-day activities of running a family and a home? Have you gotten out of bed in the morning, ready for the day, ready for a brisk walk, or have you given in to that need for 20 more minutes of fitful sleep? Do you have a place to connect with other parents of children who are aggressive or explosive? Have you kept your sense of humor? And are you forgiving of yourself and others when things don't always go as planned? Let's look at a quote now that talks about the importance of self-care. I have become clear of at least one thing. Self-care is never a selfish act. It is simply good stewardship of the only gift that I have, the gift that I was put on earth to offer to others. Anytime we can listen to our true self and give it the care that it requires, we do so not only for ourselves, but for the many others whose lives we touch.
Oh, nice. Thank you for watching this overview of parenting physically aggressive children and youth. We've covered a lot of information in a very short amount of time. We talked about responding to kids at their own developmental level instead of their chronological age. We talked about brain development and how the brain of a child who's been traumatized may develop differently than that of a typically developing child. We talked about physiological responses in the body that occur with escalation. We talked about teaching kids how to de-escalate themselves, how to calm down themselves. And we talked about the 4 levels of agitation and how to respond at each level. We talked about how our communication can incite or diffuse a situation. We looked at triggers and how minimizing triggers can minimize escalating incidences. We talked about reinforcing positive behaviors, applying logical consequences to inappropriate behaviors, collaborative problem solving, crisis planning, and taking care of ourselves. Remember, this video is just an overview. It's just the basics, and you're encouraged to take the 6-hour classroom training to learn more about each of these topics. You can find a schedule for the 6-hour classroom training by visiting our website. Once at the website, click on the map for a list of trainings in your area. In addition, remember to always consult with a child's social worker and therapist. Again, thank you for watching, and thank you for all that you do.